In 15 years in Hollywood, no one in Hollywood has a memory of going to a sold-out Kevin Hart show, there being a line for him ever getting a standing ovation at any comedy club.
By now, it's no secret that Katt Williams has been on a mission, pulling back the curtain on Hollywood's darkest secrets, one name at a time. And sitting right at the top of that list is none other than Kevin Hart. The tension between these two didn't appear out of nowhere. It traces back to the moment Kevin publicly went after Katt, calling him out for letting his personal demons derail his career. But Katt has never been the type to let something like that slide quietly, because now, he's firing back. In a raw, unfiltered sit-down with Shannon Sharp, Katt came loaded with allegations that shook the internet. He accused Kevin of sacrificing his soul and integrity at the altar of fame, claiming Kevin was pressured into humiliation rituals, including cosplaying as a gay man just to climb Hollywood's ladder. And Kevin? He's done absorbing the hits. He's reportedly filing a defamation lawsuit, making this battle official. We're barely into 2024, and already, it's shaping up to be one of the longest, messiest years of Kevin Hart's public life.
You have to have boundaries. You have to have limits that you refuse to cross. For me, I know what they are. They've yet to been challenged, so I don't have to speak on them. I was asked to dribble a basketball on the talk show this morning.
You look good doing
it. Katt Williams sat down with Shannon Sharp for a 3-hour interview that didn't just spark conversation. It detonated. Most people weren't expecting anything groundbreaking. Nobody was bracing for impact. But that's exactly what hit them. Instead of laughs, Katt delivered receipts. He tore through the entertainment industry like a wrecking ball. But one moment cut deeper than the rest, when he called Kevin Hart out for being consumed by power and ambition. This wasn't the first time Katt had gone there. Years earlier, he'd publicly shamed Kevin for performing a gay character in an SNL skit just to appease the right people. That accusation connected to something much older and darker, a conversation circulating in Hollywood since the early 2000s. The whispers that black men were being quietly pressured to wear dresses and wigs as an unspoken rite of passage, a silent tax for entry into Hollywood's most exclusive rooms. Those whispers got louder in 2006 when Dave Chappelle sat across from Oprah and revealed that producers had actively pushed him to put on a dress against his will, and he refused.
And now, understand, I'm not talking about one person. What I just told you applies to 7 people. How they all end up with that. That's part of what you get. Other black dude. Race is not where the line is drawn. It's God's side and the other side.
Dave didn't just say they pressured him once. He revealed that producers came prepared, with a backup script already written, specifically designed for the moment Dave refused. They had a contingency plan ready before the conversation even started. This wasn't a spontaneous request. This was calculated, deliberate, premeditated. Someone had already decided Dave Chappelle was going to be placed in that costume, one way or another. The fact that an alternative script existed before he even said no suggests this wasn't about creative direction. It was about control, testing how far a man was willing to bend before he broke. And Dave? He walked away entirely, left the set, left the production, and eventually left the country. A decision the media framed as a breakdown. But looking back through the lens of everything Katt and others have said, that walk-off looks a whole lot more like a man choosing his dignity over his career.
And off making $85 million. I was over here not making $85 million. But it's all good. I don't mind $1 million a month and keeping my soul. And as long as Richard Pryor was able to be the king of comedy and a crackhead, they're going to continue to say maybe I am.
That interview sent shockwaves through the entire industry. Suddenly, every camera pointed at a celebrity became an opportunity to ask the same burning question. What do you think about what Dave said? And Kevin Hart's name landed on that list. When the question reached Kevin, his first instinct was to deflect with humor. But even through the jokes, he made one thing clear. There was a line he claimed he would never cross. No amount of pressure would convince him to put on a dress and compromise who he was. He drew that line firmly and publicly. But not long after, another respected voice in comedy stepped forward. They didn't attack Kevin directly. but the implication was sharp enough to cut through. Because when you make a bold public declaration about your integrity, and someone who knows the industry just as well quietly raises an eyebrow, suddenly that declaration doesn't land the same way. The question was no longer just what Dave experienced behind closed doors. Now people were asking, was Kevin Hart's line in the sand really as firm as he made it sound?
So now we had Big Mama's house 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah.
I've never seen Medea in a pantsuit. I think she wears dresses. So now I'm saying, why are we picking on poor little Kevin Hart? Because it was his turn next.
And then, almost as if the timing was scripted, Kevin Hart showed up on SNL in a dress and a wig. The moment landed like a thunderclap. Here was a man who had just weeks prior drawn a public line in the sand, only to appear on one of the biggest stages in television wearing the exact thing he swore he'd never touch. A large portion of his audience didn't see a comedian making a creative choice. They saw a man folding under the weight of Hollywood's expectations, doing what he needed to do to unlock the next room, secure the next seat at a table most people never get invited to. And almost immediately after that SNL appearance, Kevin's career catapulted. Bigger films, bigger deals, bigger rooms. But Katt Williams, when asked for his take, offered something far more layered than criticism. He didn't mock Kevin. Instead, he placed him inside a much larger, older pattern, arguing that Kevin wasn't solely to blame, because he was simply the latest in a long line of black men quietly guided toward that same moment, as an unspoken condition of reaching the next tier of fame. In Katt's eyes, Kevin wasn't the villain. He was just the newest chapter in a story written long before either of them arrived in Hollywood.
In 30 years, I've done nothing but collect information, knowledge, and your secrets. Come, tell me. I know so many things.
But underneath all of this sits a theory circulating through industry circles for years, that Kevin Hart wasn't just a comedian who made it on his own merit, but a carefully chosen industry plant, strategically positioned to replace Katt Williams. Because the timing was almost surgical in its precision. Right around the moment Kevin's star began its meteoric rise, the kind that felt less organic and more orchestrated, the media suddenly developed a very coordinated interest in Katt Williams, not to celebrate him, but to dismantle him. Story after story painted Katt as unstable and out of control. The addiction narrative spread fast and stuck hard, and the contrast between his declining media image and Kevin's skyrocketing visibility became impossible to ignore. Katt eventually fired back, loudly and without reservation, but the damage to his reputation had already been carefully, methodically seeded. And the question that lingered was simple. Was any of it actually organic? Or was the fall of one carefully engineered to make room for the rise of another? When Katt came back in 2018, he came back with fire. The break hadn't softened him. If anything, it had sharpened him. Because this time, Katt arrived with fresh targets and sharper accusations. And one of the names he put squarely in his crosshairs was Tiffany Haddish. Tiffany, by that point, had become one of the hottest names in Hollywood. But according to Katt, that rise wasn't as self-made as the public had been led to believe. He labeled her as another industry plant, another carefully packaged entertainer, positioned and promoted by the same invisible hands pulling strings behind Hollywood's velvet curtain all along. The accusation landed like a grenade, because Tiffany had built an image rooted in authenticity, the girl who came from nothing and earned every single seat she ever sat in. Katt's words directly challenged that narrative and forced the public to ask, how many of Hollywood's biggest success stories are genuinely organic, and how many are simply the result of someone choosing you? Now here's the thing. Katt never actually dropped Kevin's name during that interview, not once. But apparently, the silence was loud enough to hit a nerve. Kevin chose to respond, publicly, aggressively, and with zero restraint. On The Breakfast Club with Tiffany Haddish, Kevin went directly at Katt, labeling him a failure, not because of a lack of talent, but because of the choices Katt himself had made. In Kevin's telling, Katt had been handed every ingredient needed for a legendary career and squandered it by choosing addiction over discipline and chaos over consistency. The crackhead label wasn't a slip of the tongue. It was deliberate, weaponized, delivered with frustration that had been building a long time. But what Kevin may not have fully anticipated was just how precisely and how publicly Katt Williams was about to return that energy. Kevin stepped forward with confidence that had become his trademark, direct, unapologetic, and loaded with self-assurance. He argued that true legends don't spend their time tearing down people rising beneath them. They lift, they create, they build. He ran through a roll call of comedy's most untouchable names: Chris Rock, Dave Chappelle, Jerry Seinfeld, Eddie Griffin, George Lopez, and made a deliberate point. None of them stood at the top and complained about who was climbing up behind them. People genuinely secure in what they've built don't feel threatened by someone else's success. But Katt was not about to let that crackhead allegation evaporate without a response. He went straight to Instagram, calm, calculated, and absolutely ruthless, and called Kevin out directly for what he described as a deliberate, fabricated lie. As far as Katt was concerned, Kevin had crossed a line, and Katt made it crystal clear that particular debt wasn't getting forgiven anytime soon.